Hey guys, in this podcast I chat with Tanhony, author of SCP-5000, Bob the Clown, and many other awesome SCP articles. If you enjoy the podcast, make sure you're following us, and if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, make sure to give us a review. But overall, if you just enjoyed the podcast, make sure you just spread the word. The more you guys help me means the more time I can put into the podcast. Thanks, guys.
Don't forget, today is pizza day. So head on down to the cafeteria to grab yourself a hot slice.
How's it going, Tanhony? Nice to have you on the podcast.
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, it's good to be here.
So as podcast tradition, we always ask for the first question, how did you get into SCP?
Right, so I for a long time I actually pretty much forgot how I got into it because it was 9 years ago, but
Wow.
I've recently went back into the records. So I believe it was on the Something Awful forums. I was actually I got gifted a membership there at some point, I think, and I posted like twice, I'm pretty sure. But there was an SCP thread on there and I thought it just looked cool, so I came in and joined.
So what's that? I've actually never heard of that before. Something Awful for
Something Awful forums. I think it's sort of a cesspit now, but and it probably was back then as well. But it was sort of like a video game forum, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay.
I got gifted a membership to it. You had to like pay to be in it, but I never paid. So
Huh. So was it like horror stuff or like monster related like video games?
I think it was just for general sort of gaming discussion and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. So it just happened to be that person also got SCP.
Yeah,
mentioned.
I think there was like just a general thread as well, just for sort of general discussion. Someone posted it in there.
And this is pre the first containment breach, right? Because I forget exactly when that came out.
This was pre-containment breach, though. Yeah.
Wow. I think you.
I remember when the Stirs game came out, so I think I was around for even that.
Yeah, I think you're the oldest like person I've had on the podcast, like in the sense of how long they've been in the SCP community. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure you are.
It is weird to be considered one of like the old members at this point, because I remember coming in and it was like Gears was already like not around anymore, and that was like considered old back then.
Well, it's only 10 years old, right? Or is it 11 now? I can't keep up.
I'm not sure. I know I joined in 2011. Well, at least when I posted my first SCP was in 2011.
Yeah, and
but I think it was around for a couple of years before that, definitely.
the fact that you were posting in the first series shows how early, for people who don't know, you were coming in. Speaking of pieces that you've written, what is your like personal favorite piece that you've written for the SCP Wiki?
My personal favorite. It does sort of change. I've got a few that I like for different reasons, but the one that I like coming back to is one that I don't think actually got that much attention, which was SCP-4972.
Oh yes,
and that's called.
I actually haven't read that, so if you want to just give a quick rundown of what that one is.
So it's called Something Is Wrong, and it was just me trying to like. I sort of go through periods, I think, on the wiki where I like to try out something new, and I had a really weird surreal phase, and that's where that got started. So it's hard to like give a synopsis of it, but basically it's this containment unit that suddenly got found that no one has any memory of, and there's just been instructions left that you can't look into it, you can't interact with it in any way, and the whole article's them just trying to find out what's going on in there, and reality's slowly getting messed up the more they investigate it.
And that's 492, not 592, right?
4972. There,
4972. Oh, okay, sorry. That's a more recent one.
Yeah, so it's fairly recent actually. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I've read all. I think I've read the first 3,000, and then all the newer stuff. It's just kind of been pick and choose. I'm also horrendous with numbers, so a lot of times I think I've never heard of something, and then they start explaining it, and I'm like, oh wait, I have read that.
Yeah, I made a big mistake with my author page because I was too lazy to update it manually. So I just got a big graph of just numbers, so I don't even know which one I'm clicking on.
Yeah, I was digging through that earlier. Actually, okay, I did want to ask this. Why are you a cook?
Well, there's a story behind that, because originally I tried to make up my own super cool author avatar, but he was really lame, and I gave him a really stupid name and everyone made fun of me, so I turned him into a cook.
Wow.
I want to ask you a question, by the way.
Yeah, go for it.
Just to validate myself. Tarn, Tarn. That is a real first name, isn't it?
T-A-R-A-M?
Tarn, like Tarn.
Tarm. I've never heard that before.
I swear it's a real name. Everyone made fun of me for calling my guy Tarn.
Like an English name? Like maybe it's another language.
Yeah.
Tarm.
Yeah, I think it's Tarn, like with an N.
No, I've never heard of that.
It's not like a common name. I know some people are named of it, but I never heard the end of it until I changed it.
Maybe it's an English thing. I've never heard it in America, at least, that name.
No, I never actually met anyone named Tarn, but I had this notion that it was a name.
Should have Googled it. I'm sure it exists. Somewhere.
I think the guy who made Dwarf Fortress is named Tarn. So maybe that's where I got it.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I could maybe see it being like a Germanic or like Norwegian name for some reason.
Yeah, I think if it exists, I think it's that.
I'll have to ask my Norwegian friend one day. Ask him if he knows a Tarn. So that's literally the reason, is they thought your name was them.
Yeah, I just thought I had to make another way to sort of sound like Tanhony. So Tanhony.
Wow. Well, hey, it stuck. So I'm sure you got this question a million times because everyone asks you about SCP-5000, and I don't know if you're sick of it yet, but just kind of like, what are some of the big inspirations for that article? What made you want to write it? You know, the spiel.
Right. So for a lot of contests, I like usually have an idea beforehand that I sort of then adapt to the theme of the contest.
Yeah.
I just came up with 5,000 like after I found out the contest was mystery one, and I spent like a week trying to think of an idea for it, and all my mysteries are really lame. And so I was like, then a few ideas came together because I've been wanting to do like a big SCP, like a big event kind of thing, because I'd never done one of those really. Something like Site 13 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to because I'd been on the wiki for like 9 years at that point, so I was feeling a bit sort of sentimental, so I wanted to make a big sort of celebration-y piece as well. And then I thought it'd be cool if the SCP Foundation turned evil and stuff. So it was just a bunch of ideas all coming together there.
Was it kind of like your Avengers, essentially, where it's like...
Basically, yeah.
Because that's how a lot of people I've seen kind of explain it as. It's basically like the big Avengers moment for the SCP universe, where you get like all these different SCPs interacting with each other and stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of bring a lot of stuff together for it. I tried not to use too much of my own stuff because I didn't want it to seem like a celebration of me. So I tried to use a lot of like other popular articles and some, not necessarily like the biggest ones, but I want because in some cases where you like, if it was like a conveyor line of here comes 173, here comes Shy Guy, here comes 682, one after another. Like they're all in there because so I can't really say that they're not. But I wanted to like sort of also have less prominent ones popping up as well there, just make it feel like it's an actual like world. The SCP there.
Yeah, no, I really like how like there was actually cross interactions between those SCPs too. They weren't completely like isolated. Well, some were, but some weren't as isolated because you had other SCPs like bringing other SCPs from the dead. Again, I'm really bad with numbers, so I can't pull off the specifics.
Yeah,
but
as we went further in the article, I tried to like make the cross testing more ridiculous, basically.
And that
until we got like the.
Well, I was gonna say that one I feel like would be, in my opinion, one of the funnest or most fun articles to turn into like an actual film, because there's just so much. There's so many environments, there's so many locations you can work with. I feel like visually, there's so much to work with. I mean, it would be really, really hard to do, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm really happy with how 5,000 turned out, because I feel like I could write other stuff in it, and it would fit, because we only saw this like single perspective of the whole thing.
Are there any, like, I'm sure you have like specific things that you like tossed out, like old things that you were originally going to put into SCP-5000, or was it a pretty streamlined, easy thing to write overall?
I think I got pretty much everything I wanted in there. Originally, the Ganzir thing, that was going to be like even less prominent, because I really like the idea. I really like stuff in fiction where there's like this whole thing going on elsewhere that you hear about in like footnotes or something. Yeah. So originally it was just going to be like in a footnote, but as it came out, he became a little bit more prominent, but he never goes there or anything like that still.
Okay. Yeah. Because, well, so, actually, you know what? I'm not going to explain 5,000. It's so popular. we can we can save time for explaining your lesser known ones. You guys know what he's talking about then. We just talked about your most famous article, or one of your most famous. What do you think is your most like underrated hidden article, like one of your less popular articles?
Most underrated. So there's an issue because there's some that are underrated and they probably should be. they're not great.
Yeah.
Some of them. One that I really liked writing that didn't get much attention. It's not really one, but it was a group of interests I tried to like get going a little bit ago. That was called Westhead Media, and they were sort of like anomalous, like monster Hollywood. But and a lot of people liked the articles well enough, but it just never caught on. No one else ever wanted to write anything with them. It's a bit of a shame.
So like, do you want to pitch just like one of the story ideas?
Yeah. Let me get one up here. I say that I'm clicking on a random number on my page, just assuming it's gonna be on. So one I had was like this. I think a few people did write Westhead Media ones, but basically one of them was this field of flowers in Los Angeles that sort of reshaped into different faces and words, like calling for help and things like that. And it turns out through all these interviews and stuff that what's going on is like famous actors and upcoming actors and things like that are having the minds swapped with like the spirits of the flowers, and now these flower spirits are walking around as the actors for happy because they're finally not trapped inside flowers while the actors are stuck inside this field of flowers calling for help.
Oh, I like that. Did like the huge flower blooms kind of inspire that idea?
I don't know what that is there. I think this was a couple of years ago, so.
Oh yeah, so basically I think it's every year in California and LA. The entire mountains have these massive like flower blooms all over the mountains. So it's literally like fields and fields of flowers. So that's like immediate what I thought of when you're explaining the story.
I didn't know that, but that fits pretty well.
Yeah, it does actually. Happy coincidence. Because there was actually, I think it was last year. Well, obviously not this year. There was like an issue with too many like Instagrammers and like wannabe like internet influencers going to the fields to take like photo shoots, and they were like destroying all the flowers and stuff like that. So who knows? Maybe you can put that as a footnote that they're killing actors now. That's cool. Now I'll definitely have to check that one out a bit more, because I personally grew up. I was always really into like monsters and like urban legends and things like that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, especially because I grew up in New York, where you have like the whole Pizza Rat. Actually, Pizza Rat is newer. Sorry, but we had the alligators living in the sewers and all that stuff growing up. That kind of always sparked my interest of like the idea of seemingly normal things kind of hiding behind the facade of normalcy in reality. So I'm actually curious if like that did have cryptids or anything like that kind of inspired certain writings before.
I'm not. A lot of stuff I write usually isn't sort of cryptid-like, because it's usually not a living thing most of the time. It's usually like a place or an object or sometimes an event or something. Because I'm not very good at physical description.
Oh, really? So that's like the reason. That's interesting. I will say, so side note, one of the writers I like reading a lot is Wildbow. So he does like, he's known for his superhero. Do you know Wildbow? Have you read Worm, I'm assuming? That's the most famous one.
Yeah, I've read Worm. I got like partway through the sequel to that Ward, and I sort of got distracted from it, so I'm waiting to go back to it still.
I almost finished Ward. I'm like literally at like the last chapter now, because I was picking that on and off.
Oh,
you're the first person I've known
is so good
on this podcast that has actually like knows what Worm is and has read it. But I like his stuff a lot because it is. Sometimes it's very visual, but then I found, especially later into Worm, and even Ward has this problem where he has these really in-depth, really abstract fights, and it just I completely get lost, because it's just like I feel like he really struggles with like explaining things very visually without it being like George R. R. Martin, where it's just pages and pages of just like details and details and details.
I know what you mean. I think like it's something like if there's a character that makes a force field, you won't say like they stuck out their hands and the rippled. You'll say they made a force field over there.
But I won't.
So it sort of goes.
I won't explain specific scenes because it is very spoiler specifically for Ward. But what I guess I can say, minor spoiler, if you guys want to read Worm or Ward, which I do recommend, although he is rewriting Worm, so a lot of these issues I'm talking about now hopefully don't exist. But
yeah, he's going for the editing on that.
The one thing I like is like he kind of goes into what causes the powers, and whenever he goes into that stuff, it's very cool. And I think Worm does it better, but he goes more into depth in Ward, and that's where it gets a bit like he starts losing me there with like the abstractiveness. It's almost like it's so abstract it becomes boring. But and like for me personally, I'm very into like abstract weird stuff, so that's where it's always like, man, I wish he just like tried to explain this visually. I just feel like it's a very common struggle that direct authors who are working with stuff that is not of this world have to face a lot.
Yeah.
But that actually reminds me, you've written so many SCP articles, but have you written anything outside of the SCP universe?
I am actually writing a web serial. Speaking of Worm, I'm writing a web serial at the moment as well. That's sort of just entered sort of the third arc or part of the series there, and that's called Ethereal Space on Royal Road at the moment.
Oh, nice. And how do you spell that out? I just want to, so people.
It's AE. It's a bit strange. I'm pretty sure I invented this word for it, but it's AET. HERAL.
Oh wow.
And then space.
Kind of looks like ethereal, almost.
Yeah, it's sort of a rewrite of a previous one I tried doing that was called Ethereal, so I just wanted to change it a little bit.
So what's like a quick pitch on like what that's about? I'm curious.
It's kind of like a science fantasy sort of thing. It's about this like crew of basically criminals who go through space, sort of moving between all these different powers, and sort of they're small players, but they sort of keep getting involved in these bigger things. And basically each arc is a different story in this world. As you land on a planet, some stuff happens, people's schemes and plots start piling on top of each other until the whole thing ends in some kind of clusterfuck.
Oh, that's fun. Is that kind of like, I don't know if you've watched Mandalorian, but like kind of that similar vibe?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah. I need to catch up on Mandalorian. I'm still just after... Oh, no, I can't spoil Mandalorian in this. But I'm like 2 episodes behind, so I want to catch up on that pretty soon.
Yeah, so I want to get back to your web serial, but I will say Mandalorian, hands down, has been my favorite thing Star Wars has ever done, just period, like in the universe. Movies-wise, visually.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've always wanted that, like... I'm not, like, for example, the prequels, I'm not a fan of them. Sorry, guys. I know, like... It's... supposedly
I kind of like the prequels in concept, but
yeah,
a lot of the execution.
Exactly. And like I
like the world of the prequels. I think
like when I hear the movies explained, I like them. When I actually watch them, I'm like
so why'd you do that?
Like, you know, some of the dialogue is a bit dicey.
Ooh, the Shakespearean.
But I feel like with Star Wars, it really shines when you go into like the more like Western, like outlaw territory, where it's kind of like, you know, like all the Outer Rim stuff, like all the original films mostly take place in the Outer Rim, and it's like that sense of lawlessness, and I think it is considered partially cyberpunk too. Like I really like that gritty feeling, and the prequels are super clean and crisp, and I like, to me, it just lost a lot of its appeal through that. So that's why I really like Mandalorian, because it's like it's as Outer Rim as it gets, and it's as lawless as it gets, since you're literally following a bounty hunter.
Yeah, it's a very small picture, whereas the prequels is a big picture.
Yeah, so that, tying back to your web serial, is your web serial kind of like that, where it's just kind of like this very gritty, I don't like the word gritty, it's so like overused, but just kind of like this very dirty, unclean sci-fi? Or because I know there's science fantasy, I know it's a little different.
Yeah, I would say so, partially there. I don't know whether to say unclean. It's very sort of mundane, a lot of it.
Oh, okay. So it's just like day-to-day kind of slice of life in a way.
Yeah, it's like a mundane world, and then this is the group of idiots sort of barrel through and things start getting complicated.
Oh, that's fun. Is it kind of like in a sense like a butterfly effect, where they're not even realizing?
Yeah, there's definitely most of it starts off as a butterfly effect, yeah, and people wanting to take advantage of what's going on, things like that, and everyone's plans are slowly piling on top of each other.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I'm curious, like, what are some of the fantasy elements in it?
So I say fantasy because if I say science fiction, it will be exposed that I am not very good at science.
Oh.
So, but there are like, I don't want to spoil, but it's like there are powers, sort of like in Worm, where there's sort of a power source that people can use in various ways. Is very much not scientific.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is not even close to scientific either.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Force, but I've tried to sort of separate from the Force. It's not as spiritual.
Okay.
Really,
I will check it out. I will definitely check it out because I'm almost done with Ward, and I kind of fell off the boat with Ward because it was really dragging. Sorry.
Yeah, I got stuck near the end of the first arc on that, I think.
Yeah, Ward was kind of weird. Where it was very like, I feel like Worm was a lot more exciting. Ward's much more like a slow burner, where there's periods of arcs that are really cool. But I mean, I like about it. So this isn't really spoiler for Ward. It's basically like superheroes in therapy, and I like that concept a lot. Like I'm very into psychology and things like that. So I thought it was cool that like it literally surrounds. I think you should have read this by now in the first arc, where it's basically about like a youth group therapy session. Of these like young superheroes who like went through this tragedy.
Yeah, that was really good.
So, but yeah, because of that, it's like a very low stakes story, and it can definitely be kind of like
it's very
mundane. Yeah, sorry.
A bit of a whiplash from Worm, though. Yeah, because Worm is very big stakes.
Worm just like hits the ground running, so it's definitely a lot more like approachable for the general audience. I understand why that's his most famous. And it's also my most my favorite superhero villains are also in Worm, the Slaughterhouse-9.
Oh yeah,
like those are probably the most disturbing and just like actually horrifying villains I've seen with like superhero stuff.
There are some good Worm characters, I have to say. Yeah,
but I can't say anymore because I feel like we're getting anything we talk about now will be spoilers. But
read Worm.
So I will say, if you want another web serial to read, my personal favorite for Wildbow is Twig. Are you familiar with Biopunk?
Yeah, I actually got a little bit into Twig there. Again, it's another one that I got a sort of delayed on because of life, but I do intend to go back to it.
That's personally my favorite. I mean, I really like. So if people don't know what Biopunk is, it's kind of like, so I guess. There's different types of punk. So there's steampunk, there's cyberpunk, obviously. There's diesel punk, that's a cool one. But biopunk is essentially, it's like, I guess it's a type of sci-fi is where the punk comes in, where it's based on like biological manipulations. So it's a lot of like biotechnology instead of like cybernetics or robots or things like that. I personally really like medical history and stuff like that. And it also takes place in the 1920s and 30s in an alternate universe in the US. So it's got a piece of history, it's got a piece of biopunk, and then also it's got World War I stuff, but alternate reality or a parallel universe of World War I if biopunk technology existed. So that's why I really love the world, and that kind of what drew me in.
Yeah. I'm the same when there's a sort of an intriguing world. Sometimes I'm sort of going through the story to find out more about the world sometimes.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I personally like about it is I know it's not a perfect story. Some people have grievances with it, but for me, I really like how it was kind of like a cookie crumb trail of like piecing together what exactly. Okay, so the America thing kind of is a spoiler, but besides that, the cookie crumbs aspect kind of kept pulling me back when it started to dip pacing wise a little bit for me.
Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. It's satisfying to be able to like work out what's going on, like you said, puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any like? I'm curious because you're the only other person I know actually who's ever read any of Twig. What are some things you don't like about it, or that you're kind of like about?
I think maybe the protagonists are a little too young because they don't talk like their age. But I understand that's because of story reason, but it seems like still a little too young.
Because I think they're like 10 or 11 when the story starts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very long story. So I'm like I haven't read this in years because eventually they do actually age a decent amount through the story. So I think that thankfully does get a bit better when they get a bit older. But yeah, that's actually interesting. I remember I hated the like orphanage scenes and stuff like that. I was like, ugh, it was very dry, like interactions. I feel like. But anyway, for people who don't have no idea what we're talking about, moving on.
We're just dancing around actually discussing it because we don't want to spoil.
I know it's pretty rough. Well, actually, yeah. Before we move on the web serial, is there anything else you want to talk about with your web serial in general?
Nothing I can really think of. I do also do on the YouTube channel where I do Discover an SCP. I also do readings of the chapters as I sort of release them. So you can also listen to it if reading isn't your thing.
Oh, that's cool. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, they don't get many views, but
I actually prefer reading, so I won't check that out. Sorry, but you guys should.
No worries.
If you like, because I know some people really like the audiobook style. I personally like reading more. But speaking of that, you have your own podcast / YouTube channel called Discovering SCP. What's that about for like people who don't know?
Yeah, so basically what Discovering SCP is basically I have a friend, Darnell, who before we did this podcast knew very little about SCP. All he'd read was, I think, Dragon Snails and a few of my SCPs that I'd showed him. So basically the podcast is me just going through the SCP universe from Series 1, I think we're in Series 4 now, and him just giving his reactions, impressions as we read along there. It's sort of like getting a first-time reaction to SCP. And I really like first-time reaction to stuff, so I enjoy making that with him. He knows a lot more about it now, so it's basically just come us reading through SCPs for the first time, because he knows a lot about the universe at this point.
Yeah, I actually really like how, because there are like so many SCP reading channels out there, but I like the little twist you have where you have someone, at least in the beginning, who like knows nothing and they have a fresh take to everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are there any like, I guess, you're going to tell people, watch it yourself, but are there any specific moments that kind of come to mind of like his reaction and to certain things that you found like funny or entertaining?
We did, I believe, a 3-part reading of what happened to Site 13 there that we all enjoyed quite a bit, even though it was a long reading. And I think we actually got DJ Cactus who wrote it in for the last part of that. So we've had him on once or twice.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I would mostly say definitely the big ones. Usually when we read one article in an episode, we usually try and get 2 or 3. But when it's just one, that's usually one that we've really enjoyed and wanted to discuss for a while. And it's usually pretty big episodes as well. So I would say those are my favourite ones to record.
You heard it, folks. Check it out. I'll have a link in the description. I'm actually also curious. Have you done like an author's commentary on articles that are yours that you read on the channel?
I do try mostly to avoid my own articles because I don't want it to become Tyler he shills himself to podcast. But we did do I say that, but we did do an episode of only my stuff. I can't remember when exactly that was. It was pretty early on, I think.
Because I feel like that would actually be kind of cool to hear like the behind the scenes, like what was going through your head while writing certain SCPs that you wrote personally. So
yeah, there was definitely some of that.
Check it out, because I won't have all the hours of time to ask about every SCP written. There you go. I'm really selling this.
No worries.
So actually, yeah, I'm curious, like, do you have, the way you structured it, do you have specific SCPs that you think are like more beginner friendly?
Yeah, so we started off with, the first thing we read wasn't actually SCP, it was the introduction to the wiki. And I usually try in episodes like put things together to a theme. So like I introduced the Church of the Broken God with a couple of their articles, then the Sarkic Cults or the Factory, or Dado. I think we had in a recent one.
Oh, I love Dado. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just sort of trying to introduce things bit by bit and just sort of relate. Usually I try and relate it back to something else we've already read.
Oh, that's,
so like
that's
GOC was yeah. So just trying like I don't want to like stuff it all on straight away, so we slowly sort of build up the universe with the ones I sort of pick.
And then, So you basically did like organizations first, and then you moved towards like the more popular ones or articles.
We did do some of the more popular ones first, just like Shy Guy, things like that, just because those are some of the. I think those give off like the best impression for what you want to expect an SCP to be like. Because then the wiki comes out with the ones that are meant to sort of subvert that or play around with that sort of impression.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I'm usually the opposite.
So it's like getting the baseline down before.
Yeah, no. So you can see like how people, because I know there's SCPs out there where they kind of twist the algorithm. I mean, yours does that. What's it called? 5683. Like that was poking fun at obviously 682, Killable Lizard. That's the spider one.
Yeah.
People don't. Yeah. But I'm usually the opposite, ironically, with my friends, where I'm like, oh, don't read Peanut, don't read Shy Guy. There's more interesting ones, because in my personal experience, those ones didn't really pull me into the wiki. It was really the more like world-minded stuff that had like more to dig into, like Scarlet King, like things like that.
We still haven't done the Scarlet King, so we need to get that done on the podcast sometime, I think.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a pretty hefty one. Especially if you like I watched exploring series stuff on it, where he kind of really,
so good.
He like created a whole narrative through the whole thing that I thought was really cool. I haven't read that one so long that I don't have much to say about it. That's my issue, is like I've read a lot of these years ago and kind of just slipped my mind. And it's so much to reread. So I tend to just only reread things when I'm like working on videos for specific ones now. I mean, do you even remember all the things you've written off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head, no. I wrote too much.
Like, do you actually know the exact number? Because I know it keeps changing of how many articles you've actually written.
I think it's in the early 50s. Actually, I can ask the bot here, I believe, and it'll tell me. And I think it might actually be in the hundreds there, so I'm probably wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty high up in terms of number of articles written.
I think you were third last time I checked.
Yeah, so I've got actually 132 pages now, so I was very wrong with what I said.
Wow, that's crazy. Man.
Oh, average rating of 173, that's the SCP number.
Actually, so I'm actually curious, for people who don't know how this works. How do articles get voted on? Like, who can vote on them? Who can't? Like, what's the whole like kind of process?
So
like,
basically, anyone can post an article as long as they have a account, of course, and anyone who has an account can vote on an article, either upvote, downvote, or just leave it alone if you don't really have an opinion. So the only really requirement is that you have an account on the wiki.
I'm surprised how few votes even the most popular ones have then, if that's really all it takes.
A lot of people, I think, just read things without really engaging with it in that way sometimes, though, because people are busy, I guess, or they just don't have that big of an opinion on it.
I will say, me personally, I wasn't even aware of that feature till like 2 years in, so I think that might also be a factor.
When you see the number, that there might also be like an equal number of downvotes, though. You never know.
That's true. Total. That's fair, actually. Yeah, that's actually really fair. I've personally never written anything, so I've only seen it from the viewer side. I've never really seen kind of like the behind the scenes, so to speak, of that process. Because I've heard it's pretty terrifying releasing articles, especially when you're newer. I mean, do you remember your experience?
I remember people were a lot less nice back then as well about it. The first few SCPs I made, I won't miss word, they were utter shit. But it just sort of kept at it, and eventually I got one that went pretty well.
Do you know how long that took for you to get one to stick?
I think it took about a week or so.
Oh wow, that's actually quite fast.
Yeah, so I was a teenager then, so I had too much energy, so I just lived life at turbo speed. If you look at my author page, you can see the dates when my first articles were made. First one that was successful, 18th of August, then 20th, 21st, 22nd, 22nd again, 24th, 24th again, 25th. So and then 25th one was 993 there, so at the end of my first week is when I wrote that one, I guess.
Wow, you were really on a roll then. Talk about a streak.
Yeah.
I've always been shocked about how fast I guess you are one of those authors. How some of these authors, how quickly they put up articles.
When I am writing, I write quick though, yeah, but there are huge breaks sometimes in between like these rapid bursts.
Do you have like a backlog of ideas and then you just kind of pull from that, or is it really just spontaneous?
Sometimes I do. I remember I had one that was like half finished on my sandbox for like a year before I came back and finished it. But usually it's something I come up with like a couple of days before I start writing again that makes me want to write it. So I need something to like make me want to go back to it for a bit.
Oh, okay, yeah. I tend to do the bounce around of style too. I like to sleep on things for a bit because sometimes I think I have a great idea. I sleep on it and I'm like, this is shit. This is literally trash. Gives me a fresh perspective. So we're kind of talking about how you got into the wiki, but for new writers or people who've been trying and they just can't get an article to stay on the site, what are kind of some tips you have for those people?
So I did actually make a video on how to write an SCP on this channel, so check that out too. But
Hey.
so going over it now in the interview, I would say the most important thing is the narrative though, because a lot of people, I feel, are tempted to make it just this cool sort of magic item they found or a cool monster. But you have to give like the reader a reason to be interested in it. Like Shy Guy, I think, is probably the best at this because it gives you this cool monster with a cool gimmick, and then it sort of shows off the monster, what it does, and it presents that narrative with that big log where it goes after the guy who took the photo of it and stuff. So it's not just... I really probably wouldn't like Shy Guy without that sort of escape log and everything, because that's what sort of makes it for me. And that's when they released the film of it, because it's all based on that log.
Yeah. So really like how it interacts with the world and
Exactly.
the story that unfolds. Yeah, I mean that's personally I prefer. I am guilty. I tend to skip the containment part of the articles.
You don't have to apologize to me because I don't like writing them either.
For me sometimes I jump straight to the logs. I'm not gonna lie, and then I'll go back and read the description afterwards. I should read your tales and more tales in general because, ironically, I'm much more of like a narrative kind of person. I prefer, like even with TV, I hate sitcoms. I hate things that are like they don't progress or have a plot.
Yeah.
And so I've only read The Old Man and the Halloween tales, and that's it. It's just a bit overwhelming, I find, with the tales, where I'm just like, I guess I am a little picky in the sense that I don't like reading bad stuff, so I'd rather just wait and have someone recommend stuff to me.
A lot of people say that, yeah, I think Cactus said at this point that he just waits for his friends to recommend stuff to him.
I completely relate to that feeling. How much do you actually read yourself, though? I'm curious, like, at least with tales or things like that.
I very rarely read tales.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone specifically recommends it to me, I may get to it like a week later, but... Yeah, most of the stuff that comes on the wiki, I usually don't know about. Until, for whatever reason, someone posts a link to it somewhere, I am.
Alright, that makes me feel so much better. Because a lot of times I'm like, I talk to Sumerian or things like that, or even Vulcan sometimes, and they're just like, they're so on the dot with like, they know what's going on all the time with the wiki. And I'm just like, oh, I'll find out about it like months later.
Yeah, I have bursts where sometimes I am like that, but just like writing, I sort of drift back and forth on it.
I mean, do you feel like you need to just kind of screw off and forget about the wiki every now and then for a while?
I would say so, though, yeah. Otherwise, I would run out of ideas very quickly.
Well, okay, so this is one reason I've never written an article, is it feels like, you know, there's almost or basically 6,000 articles now, because 5,000 is done, right? That whole series.
5,000.
Sure.
The 5,000s, I think, are still ongoing.
Okay,
but they're filling up alarmingly fast.
So technically less than 6,000 right now, but I'm kind of at the point where I know when you submit articles, there are people out there who really do their homework and know most of the articles and memorize all of them. And I know it is pretty important that it has to be a relatively original idea. And I feel like that's the part that intimidates me the most, is like, thinking you have this great idea, spending hours or days working on it, and then you post it, and someone's like, "Yeah, this has been done like 2 different times." So the article's
Yeah, that's
gotta
happened
go.
to me.
Like, is it not as common as I think, or is it pretty like happens decent amount of times?
I think I would say the important part of it is not necessarily having an original idea, it's having an original take on that idea. So you can do the same thing as someone else has done as long as you go somewhere else with it.
Okay, that's a better way to think about it, actually. Just take into a different direction.
Yeah, because at 6,000, you're going to do the same thing as someone else has done. It's inevitable.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, how are these all original ideas? Like, they just kind of blew my mind. So I guess not. Mind less blown now. Well, even when I was reading the spider one that you did, I was kind of like, wait, why does this exist? I didn't finish it, but I'm like, this is literally just 682. I was like, there's got to be a twist. And of course, there was a twist. Yeah. I recommend that one for people who haven't read that one.
Yeah, that was sort of the intended reaction reading through it.
Because literally the entire time I'm thinking, like, aren't these all supposed to be original? But, oh, look, it's snowing. Sorry, we just got a snowstorm we're living. Just in time for Christmas. Even though this won't come out this month. Sorry, people. I was considering doing a Yule Man SCP thing for Christmas. But I'm still locked down here. I'm in New York. There's really no one in person who could really appreciate a Yule Man reading for Christmas. So it is what it is.
Yeah, same here. We're pretty much in lockdown here still. So I was actually thinking of doing Yule Man for Discover an SCP like Christmas special, but I think it's a bit too heavy.
Yeah, it's not a fun story, to say the least. I mean, I personally love, like, do you know Krampus?
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of an even worse version of Krampus, kind of in the sense of something kind of creepy and well, Krampus is technically kind of a good guy, not to get into that. But I really like. There's like a folklore feel to Yule Man that I really like.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Like that's another thing that kind of drew me to SCPs. I've always really been into like mythology and things growing up, other than the cryptid stuff. So I tend to really like the ones where, like, okay, so for example, with your second proposal with the Black Moon. Yeah. I really like the origin story. I really like the conversation with the administrator where he kind of talks about where he came from, and there's just this real like ancient mythological feeling that it carries that I personally am a sucker for. I get really strong, interesting imagery whenever I read kind of those works that involve that sort of feeling. I have not finished reading that one though, because that was a pretty dense read. I've only read, I don't think I've fully read a single like 001. I've read bits and pieces of Daybreaks. I've read bits and pieces of yours, and I think one other, but I'm almost like turned off, I think, by a lot of 001s, not because of the actual writers or writings, but I just, as a creator, I always get people saying, do this 001, do this 001. I'm like, I'm just like, it slowly backs away. Which is a shame, because I really did like that aspect, so I should really like use that as an excuse to kind of just jump in, drop my biases.
I know you mean. The recommendations do not end. It's always like, I can only do so many things.
Well, for me specifically, it's usually like the younger fans who always recommend those ones. So I think that also kind of is why I'm like a little hesitant. But the concept for Daybreaks, I think, is interesting. I mean, I like a lot of like Lovecraftian kind of horror stuff, like cosmic horror stuff, and it definitely has that tone. I mean, I like the I really like the administrator idea of like the one who started that he started the foundation, right? That's implied, right? Because they kind of say so, and one thing that I really like that conversation specifically is there's this talk of like basically the only way to defeat or stop the 001 is by observing it, but the whole thing is it can't be observed. So, and then you kind of paint an allegory to Moby Dick. I'm not sure if this was your intention, but so I've been doing a lot of like mindfulness meditation for the past month, And a huge theme of mindfulness meditation is observing yourself. So, like, if you want to, I guess I'll visually kind of try to explain what I'm saying. It's basically when you are sitting and like we're talking right now, and the way we're observing the world, we subconsciously imagine that we are in our heads, taking it in. Like it's almost like we're like in the back of our minds. But then when you try to observe that thing, it's not there. So basically a method in mindfulness meditation to make you more. So the whole thing with mindfulness meditation is like a deep awareness of everything that's going on in your experience, and understanding that you're parallel to your experience. You're not a little man in your head experiencing experience, if that makes sense. So that's why for me, I found it really interesting that the most powerful technique that I like is where you sit down and you just try to observe who, like the thinker in your head. Where is it? What does it look like? Like how does it feel? And of course it's impossible. Was that your intention, or is that just me projecting?
That wasn't something I was aware of, no. But it does fit pretty well.
Yeah, because I got really excited when that happened. I was like, oh crap. It fits so well. Because I've been trying to like mix things like personal philosophies that really help me in my life or that I find really interesting. I always like trying to incorporate that into stories. Do you do that with any of your writings, or is it?
Definitely, I would say so. Though, yeah, there's a lot of. I don't think you can write anything without having the stuff you believe as part of it, even if you don't mean to.
Yeah, I mean, I always love when I write something, and I unconsciously write in a lot of like stories I like or certain themes that I tend to gravitate towards, and then I kind of like, it's like I reverse engineer the themes that I end up unconsciously putting into stories. Do you feel like you have any like certain themes that you always kind of end up unintentionally writing into certain stories?
You can sort of track the sort of Tanhony line through a lot of my stuff. You can people usually say they can tell it's from me at the point where weird shit starts happening and it doesn't get explained.
So that's like your marker is just like unexplained. It always spirals into a bunch of weirdness.
A lot of my recent ones do spiral, yeah.
Is there like a specific reason that you found of why that tends to happen?
Something that I found is like a lot of the stuff that isn't meant to be like understandable. It is understandable if you just use some made up words. I wanted to make like something that, like, even though I know what's going on, like the reader, it looks like it's like sort of dream logic. I think like 4972, the one I was talking about before, something is wrong. That was inspired by a nightmare I had. That made no sense at all, but I found it was terrifying. Even though if I were to describe it now, it's like comical. But it's like a thing with dreams. Like a thing can be scary without having a reason to be scary. It's just you're scared of it because you just are.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I've definitely had. I actually don't have nightmares very often, but the few times I have, they were very goofy afterwards. I actually remember my first nightmare. I was 5, and I was in like an old haunted house, but it almost looked like those really crappy like amusement park haunted houses. And there was this literally like cliche like dude dressed as Dracula with like the thick white face paint over him, and he was chasing me around, and that was like I was just terrified, and it was basically very maze like, and I was getting lost in this very dark like Victorian style old mansion. And I think there was like a really crappy dumb looking zombie at some point too, and I literally bolted up, woke up sweating from that dream. So like looking back now, it seems kind of silly, but it was terrifying when I experienced it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I think I had a dream where like someone had like a pair of floating eyes and like a skeleton was just floating after me, chasing me. But it was like cartoonish, so it wasn't like so it was just stupid. But I was terrified.
Have you ever had like sleep paralysis before or things like that?
Oh god, no! That's like one of my worst fears.
I thankfully haven't either, but I know there are definitely a lot of horror writers. Well, I know, like, for example, Stephen King, a lot of his nightmares, and I think he's had sleep paralysis too, that has literally written, like, entire novels for him.
I just hate the idea of it, yeah.
Yeah, because I think he actually has a disorder or something that causes him to have like nightmares almost every other night.
Oof.
So grateful not to have that problem. I'm thinking of dreams. Are there like other dreams that you can think of that have also directly influenced stories?
Apart from the 4972 one, I wouldn't say so. That's the only one that I remembered clearly enough after waking up to like sort of filter into some kind of logical article.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever directly written anything from a dream for that exact reason, because I find like unless I get very interesting imagery, I can kind of pull that imagery and make that like a piece of a story, but it never really can stand on its own fully.
Yeah. Yeah, even with 4972, it was just like the imagery I took for like the very ending there. A lot of it was just a framing device for that image at the end.
Yeah, it's like the seed that kind of everything kind of sprouts up from. So actually, that reminds. Do you tend to write things chronologically, or is it very much you get an idea and then you just kind of work around whatever point in the story that idea is?
It depends. Sometimes, if I can't get the description like out of my head and onto a page, like I will write the logs first and work backwards. But most of the time, I do write it chronologically. Yeah, just because I have to write it really quickly, or else I'll lose interest. I know that.
Okay, so that's like one of the things that fuels why you write so quickly. Well, okay, so you're writing this web serial though. Is that really challenging because that's not something you can just write in a day or two?
Well, each chapter I do get written fairly quickly there. I manage to get like 2 days for 10 pages because I do it during my breaks at work and sort of at lunchtime. That's sort of like 20, I would say around 30 minutes a day. So I've managed to sort of get it as part of my schedule, so I feel like obliged to do it now.
That's enough to satisfy the itch that you don't lose any interest in it.
Yeah. As long as I keep doing it, I want to keep going.
Okay, so it's like a momentum thing then.
Yeah, definitely momentum.
Yeah, I find that's really hard for film, keeping up momentum, because like one thing that's amazing about writing is it's just like you and yourself, and the only barrier to you getting it done is yourself.
You don't need much.
Problem with me is film. It relies on, especially indie films, it relies on people, favors, people.
Yeah, you can't just whip out a handy cam.
Yeah, so, I mean that's why I'm moving to 3D animation now, because it's just like me and my team, and we don't have to worry about as many outside factors. So there's almost like a freedom in that aspect. But that's something I've always been envious of people who are just pure straight writers. There's like a freedom to it that I find.
Yeah, I can understand that. So I sometimes feel the other way. Like sometimes I think I should have studied animation or some shit.
Why? Because there's like that's like frustration that you can't visually get it out there.
Yeah, sometimes it's because I have tried like getting into art, like drawing and stuff like that. I am not built to draw stuff. It's a fact. I have the worst hand-eye coordination, so I can see things clearly in my head, but I cannot draw them in anything close to that.
I'm like in a weird boat. I kind of screwed myself over. I'm like an okay like physical drawer, but I never decided to invest in that skill. But I have a very, very visual mind, so I almost like made peace with the fact that like these things, that the visual things I try to write it down as a reminder, but they're always going to be like things for me, and never things that I can really show the public. 3D animation is kind of changing that now though, because I've realized that if you have a small team, like if you have like, thankfully I have my friend who models, and I have another friend who's teaching me the other aspects of it. I find it's almost easier than 2D animation, because you're not a lot of 2D drawing and animation in general is like trying to pretend this 2D thing is 3D, and there's a lot of these annoying tricks you have to do for perspective.
Yeah.
3D, there's none of that. Like, I find the challenges with 3D are not nearly as annoying, or as they're definitely hard, they're difficult, but it's not as bad in my opinion as the 2D animation and drawing.
Yeah, I get what you mean there.
But that's interesting, yeah, because I have talked to a decent amount of writers who it seems like most writers I've talked to, they don't just identify as writers. They always kind of want to do another thing on top of writing. Do you have that?
Personally, not really. It's just sort of the writing for me that I'm interested in.
Wow.
When I say like I wish I could draw, it's like I wish I could draw like a cool picture. It's nothing like I wish I could do this with artistic skill.
Like, so the reason I bring that up is because recently I had Siberian on, and he was like, "Oh, I'd rather be an actor." I'm like, "What?" Oh, interesting. So, and then like I've in personal experience too, I've had writers, but it's nice to actually meet I guess a full-fledged writer in that sense, where it's like that's your main focus, and you're you're happy with that.
Yeah, that's why I want to like hopefully one day like do professionally for monies.
Yeah, so like what would be like your dream writing gig? I'm curious.
Definitely like novel publishing, I think, if I could like keep myself to one task long enough to get a novel done. I think I've got a half written one somewhere that I just lost interest in. It wasn't very good anyway, so
So one of my friends actually reads, we were talking about web serials, he reads a lot of Chinese web serials. And I have yet to see this with an English web serial, but some of the popular Chinese web serials, they were actually able to start publishing their entire web serials into like a book series.
Yeah, I think there are a few English ones that have done that.
Yeah, so like if that might be a cool way to like make that happen, is if your web serial does well, who knows, you know. That's like I feel like I've seen that route a bit more often lately because it's almost like lower risk in that sense, where you don't have to get a publisher and blah blah blah. You can kind of build the fan base first and then turn it into like a physical novel series.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree with you there.
I'm still like I have not really explored the universe of web series because I got into it through Wildbow and then I haven't really left Wildbow since. But I've heard of really good ones. I feel like I should explore it a bit more because I'm sure it's a massive community.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, like with anything though, there is a risk of like not very good ones, but the way I see it, you get that with novels as well, with normal books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because it gets published is not a marker of quality necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, every fan's gonna have their own opinion of what they like and don't like. I feel like that stuff can be pretty subjective. To a point, there are definitely certain things that work or don't work. Like, okay, so for example, I actually know a lot of people are complaining about a lot of the Chinese web serials. I forget the site they use for the ratings for web serials, but a lot of Chinese, like really mediocre, like very cheesy action fantasy. A lot of them are like fantasy historical stuff for Chinese stuff. They were like holding the top places for a while, and a lot of people are like, why are these the top? These are so like mediocre cliche garbage. But turns out the Chinese community I think is larger, so like they just already have that edge.
Yeah, and certain things just become popular weirdly for like long amounts of time, I guess.
Yeah, just because there's just more readers that are a part of it. Popularity doesn't always mean quality. I'm sure as a SCP author, you're well aware of that.
I know. I mean, I won the 5,000 contest, and look what happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, you've said that before. Like, you were surprised how well 5,000 has done.
Yeah, I was really surprised because it was weirdly winning by like a lot, which I didn't expect.
I mean, so what do you think like made it so popular?
I have to say, I think I have to owe some of it to the fact that it's a big SCP crossover, because that's like kind of a draw already there, and it gets a lot of people who ordinarily wouldn't be interested in like the 5,000 contest in it, I think.
I also posted it. A big wow factor for me. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I also posted it pretty early on, so I had more time to accumulate votes, I think, as well.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Timing, yeah. So, do you think timing in general is usually pretty important for series?
I think for contests, definitely, because the earlier you post it, the more you accumulate votes, and then you get considered like one of the big articles that's in the contest, just by the fact that you've been there earlier.
Makes sense. Because I'm sure not everyone goes through every single entry and all that stuff.
Yeah, so like by the time the contest ends, there are so many entries that no one's read them all. There's no way.
Yeah, I mean, I've never. I feel like, are there like specific regulars who really do the work to sift all through that stuff?
I suppose there must be someone who read like a lot of them. I doubt there's anyone who's read all of them, to be honest. Just because every day there's like 5 or 6 usually.
Yeah, like that's what I was always like. How do I guess I was naive enough to think they were like these super hardcore fans that have just been on the wiki elites. They've been there for 8 years, and they're just like, we're the law. We decide what is good and what isn't. But I guess not.
Yeah, so there's maybe one person out there who's like the chosen one who's read them all, but I doubt it.
Can you say who that is? I'm actually curious.
I don't. He's a hypothetical person. I don't think he exists.
Oh, you never
the Avatar.
Okay, so this is one thing I really want to ask you about. So I personally love your Garfield article. I think it's hilarious in its very twisted way. And I was looking into the history of it because I was like, I've seen all these like "I'm sorry, John" memes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And did you start that trend unintentionally?
I don't know. I think I think it might be coincidental because whenever I see Garfield SCP on YouTube, it's always like the Gorefield "I'm sorry, John," which is usually very different. Actually, very different to what's in the actual article. So I sometimes get the feeling that people just want to make a Gorefield like video, but want to have SCP in the title, which is a bit cynical of me. But
I think you're underselling yourself. I have a reason why. So I kind of went into the internet history site. I forgot the name of it. It's like Know Your Meme, I think. And so the original source isn't your article. They claim it's this comic from I can't remember the name, but it was a comic strip, like 3-panel, 4-panel comic strip where it shows John walking to his apartment and he sees like Garfield textured like fur all over his house and his walls and his items, and then he walks into a room and there's Garfield's face in like the center of the wall, and he says something about like "I'm sorry, John" or something, and that's it. There's no Gorefield, there's nothing. That's it. Then a couple years, this is like 2013, and there's a few scarce memes, but no trend really picks up. Then your article comes out, and I mean the description is still kind of Gorefield-esque in the sense that it's just this very disturbing form of Garfield that comes out. And then I noticed the trend kind of explodes after the release, like the same year in 2018 and 2019 is when
you do have a point there, actually.
So it's like I think you can take that credit. Like to me the comic came out so like 5 years before the trend. I really don't think like that really created the trend.
What have I done?
How does that feel? Like, how cool is that?
It's pretty cool, actually, if that is the case.
Because, I mean, it was not like an isolated thing, because there were, I think, specific artists that made work inspired by the SCP article, and that's really what created the Gorefield thing, so that's why it looks pretty different than the SCP description.
Yeah.
But it definitely seems like that was one of the dominoes that kind of got that going. So
interesting.
Now you don't need to be as cynical when people say SCP Gorefield. And I like, for example, I have watched like Lumpy. There's a couple other YouTubers who've done like, they basically based a huge chunk of their channel over like just one idea. And there was these really weird live action Garfield stuff. I don't know if you've seen those.
I don't think I've seen. Lasagna Cat, you mean?
It might be him. Yeah, I don't remember his name.
Lasagna Cat was a definite inspiration to the SCP Garfield, but
what's like the like, if you remember anything from his, like what's, because that's, I'm trying to ring a bell of like that specific one.
It's just Lasagna Cat is like weird Garfield music videos that sort of became more and more surreal into sort of like a 10-hour video of like people answering a hotline.
Oh yes, that is what I'm thinking of. Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, that was one of the things sort of in my mind when I wrote 3166.
Do you think that's like peak for you? No, okay. Like this is the peak of my career. Look at the monster I've created.
I hope not.
Well, I will say, I am happy that Bobble the Clown. I do like Bobble the Clown. I actually was considering making a short film for Bobble the Clown, but I'm very happy that that is not your most popular thing.
I have to say the one I wrote in my first week, I'm glad it is not still my peak.
Yeah, I mean that's probably. I mean, do you feel like Garfield was your second biggest thing before 5,000 came out, or is that also kind of a sleeper?
I would say the second biggest one was 1437, which is the hole that goes to all the parallel worlds there. Mm-hmm. So that was the next biggest one after Bobble. So I think it's still like its third most popular one, unless Garfield overtook it at some point.
Well, on the wiki, Garfield's less popular, but I feel like pop culture wise, I've definitely seen more Gorefield. If you want to take that credit, which I think personally, I think you should take some of that credit.
Yeah, it's mine. Let's just say I made Gorefield. It's mine.
I helped take him. Look, that's what the page says. You have it in writing. Whoever wrote that page.
Yeah. You just have to read the page. What can I say?
I should make a little trophy for you that said creator of Gorefield or something. Because I thought like the Gorefield thing was one of the. I didn't even realize it was. When I first saw it, I didn't realize there actually was an SCP Garfield. I thought it was like when people were saying like how Siren Head was an SCP, it was just kind of like a fan sandbox thing. So it's kind of a pleasant surprise to see that. But speaking of the sandbox, have you ever messed with that? The SCP sandbox stuff? Do you ever submit work there?
The SCP sandbox. That's basically before I write an article properly, I will write it through the sandbox just so I can see how it look on the wiki.
So like, is that what most authors do in general? They always just kind of post it there to get reception and workshop.
Yeah, it's basically the sandbox is basically just where you write it up so you have that wiki format without actually posting it on the main wiki yet.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting because I always took it as a more like writers who couldn't get their stuff on the SCP wiki just right there as a safe space kind of thing.
No, it's basically just like the preview, the glorified preview.
Okay, that's more interesting then. It gives it a bit more validity, I guess. Are there any SCPs that you haven't written that you think are like underappreciated or deserve like a bit more attention?
I'm just thinking about it, sort of stuff outside of like the main ones that you see on all the big channels, things like that. I would say one that I really like. I'm trying to remember the number of it now. I'm never gonna remember the number because there's 6,000 of them. But it's like one set in World War One. It's all like legends of things like King Arthur's going to come back to life to save England. In Germany, they have the guy in the king in the mountain, who comes back to save Germany, I guess. And it's just sort of all those guys coming out at once during World War One. It's just sort of their reactions to the modern world and like the horrors of the First World War and stuff. I just thought it was a really interesting story, and I really enjoyed that one.
Oh, that's cool. I actually like that a lot. Yeah, if you find out, let me know because I actually would want to read that. Like one of the reasons why I like the Old Man is because it kind of delves into the World War One stuff. I'm a huge sucker for that time period because I think it's really interesting. Not just because it was like the biggest war at the time, but more so you have the old world having this violent rebirth. And really, I feel like the world became the modern world after World War One.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one of the few times in history where you see a clear line over a course of years between the old world and the new world. Usually it's a much slower progression. So I think that's kind of why I tend to... I also, World War II, I feel like I've heard about it growing up all the time, and at least in America, we don't really teach World War One that much. You kind of just think World War One's really boring, and then you realize, oh wait, there's a lot more to the story than I thought.
Yeah, I remember in history in high school, it was just World War II and nothing else. So as far as I knew, nothing else happened in the history of the world.
Like for me, I assumed it was just because the Americans were so barely involved in the war. That's why we didn't really focus on it that much. But I guess not. This is hard to do off the top of your head. But
Okay.
do you have any like books or writings that you would really recommend people to read, like some of your personal favorites?
I was actually going to say, before we mentioned it before, I was already going to say Wild Boar and Worm. I would definitely give that a read. Stephen King we've mentioned as well. He was a big inspiration for me. He has a book called On Writing that I read when I was a little younger, and that's probably influenced me quite a bit. That's really good. Really good
I've
book.
heard a lot of good things about that one. Yeah, I've heard good things about that.
In the last couple of years, I've got into like some of Brandon Sanderson stuff. He's a fantasy writer, and I've really enjoyed like his series. There's a lot of it epic fantasy, which is a bit different from what I usually write, but I like reading it.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of him.
He's really good, dude. Check it out. He did Mistborn and the Stormlight Archives. Those are some of his like bigger ones.
Oh, that sounds vaguely familiar. The second one.
Yeah, I think the newest one just came out like a couple of months ago. I've not read that one yet, so that's probably where you've heard his name.
I've slowly been getting into collecting physical hard copies now for books, just because I feel like there's a nice, like especially for like the real sci-fi and fantasy stuff I like collecting. Like I just got all the Akira manga. I like a lot of Junji Ito stuff. He's a horror manga writer.
Oh, he's so good.
So yeah, I just got Tomei and Uzumaki. So I've been finding it's nice for at least the visual stuff. Because I'm guilty of not rereading things, but at least with manga, it's a lot easier kind of just to page through and get like visual inspiration from. But
Something else I would say that's probably also influenced me, that it's not already like written. It's Doctor Who.
oh yeah,
especially. Yeah, Doctor Who's a lot of it, like, especially my favourite one was Series 5 to, like, Series 10, I think. Sort of that period, because a lot of it was, like, science fantasy-ish in the way where it gave you these, like, weird ideas and, like, weird concepts that the episode sort of ran off of. We didn't, like, feel the need to, like, go into technobabble about it.
Yeah, okay, so that is kind of a pet peeve of mine, too, with sci-fi, is sometimes when they try to explain the thing, and I'm like, just don't
It's like, if you...
thing.
It's like one episode is these flying fish, and they like say, "Oh, the fish fly in the fog," and it's like that's enough for me. I don't need to know anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I hate when they have to like make up all these fake terms. I mean, sometimes it works. I'm not gonna say I hate it all the time, but like, well, because I actually was talking about this yesterday with a friend, how like I kind of grew up with more Japanese sci-fi because I felt like growing up I was never really a fan of a lot of the Western shows. Like I didn't really care for Doctor Who. I didn't care for Battlestar Galactica. I didn't care about Star Trek growing up. I know people arrest me. I appreciate it more now. But I feel like it's kind of interesting to see how a lot of those shows have changed. Because like for me, again, Doctor Who was just too episodic for me. There is an overarching plot though, I think, right? With all the seasons.
Yeah, it sort of varies from series to series how serialized it is.
Okay. Because I only saw like random episodes.
Yeah, like series 5 to 10, the bit I was talking about, that's I think where it got most serialized.
Oh, okay.
That's probably the reason.
It was also super overwhelming because like I didn't personally know anyone who was really into it, and I see that it's like been running since like the 70s or 80s. Like it's a really old show.
Yeah, it's stupidly old.
So usually if there's like more than 2 seasons, I'm like I don't know where to start, and I just run away.
Yeah, Doctor Who, like pretty much I think it came back in 2010. That was pretty much kind of a reboot that slowly 2005 even it came out. It started off like it basically a reboot, but acknowledging that there was a series before, and it slowly incorporates the classic Doctor Who back into it as the series goes on. Which is kind of an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah. All right, so we are getting close to the end. Before we wrap up, is obviously check out the YouTube channel, link in the description. Check out the web serial, link in the description. Is there anything else you want to shout out while you're here?
My friend Darnell who does the Discovering SCP podcast with me. He is also doing a podcast of his own called I think it's Good Morning Poon Poon, and it's based on a manga he's reading, I'm pretty sure. So I think he'll be happy with me if I sort of plug that as well.
Oh, cool.
It's
Yeah,
sort of discussing this.
I've actually read some of that one. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's just him and a few other guys just sort of going through the chapters. I think just sort of discussing it. So we'll maybe check if you're listening and you like that manga, maybe check it out.
Yeah, do it or else. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. It was nice to pick your brain on some of the articles, especially the Garfield one. Yeah, and happy to have you on.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's good to be here. I had a fun time.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.